Hey everyone, it's Tali from the AstroTwins, and I'm here with Leisa Schaim. How are you doing, Lisa?
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for being on. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Leisa, she's a Denver-based astrologer. You combine modern and traditional astrological approaches to help us all make sense of what underlies our everyday existence. That's great. I know you have a particular focus on timing and the concrete topics of life. So Leisa provides monthly elections. Those are the best astrological dates and times to do the important things that we know you're all doing out there. And you do that for the Astrology podcast. You're also the co-host of the Auspicious Elections podcast and the co-organizer of the Denver Astrology Group and the past presiding officer of the Association for Astrological Networking. And I saw that you also helped to organize UAC, right, this year? One of the Chicago-based conference. So you're deep in the astro world, which is awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and so you have prepared an amazing topic for us, which are annual profections. So, this is a Hellenistic approach, right? And can you say a little bit about the difference between Hellenistic astrology and the modern day astrology that, maybe you get on in newspapers, magazines, or general tropical charts? What's the difference there? Yeah.
Sure. So, Hellenistic astrology was the original Western astrology that was originated about 2,000 years ago. And, you could talk about that for a good while alone, but the basic difference, I guess, would be, without oversimplifying, there is a bit more of a focus on things, on fated things and not complete free will. There's also a focus more on the concrete areas of life and timing, what happens when, that kind of thing, in order to help you plan. Yeah. And so, and modern astrology isn't like 180 from that, of course, but there tends to be a bit more focus on like psychological things in a sort of self-help way. So I try to blend both of those to kind of give a well-rounded approach to clients.
I think that's great. There's so much you can obsess about with astrology. There's always another thing to learn. And Hellenistic astrology is not something that I've personally, taken a dive into. So I'm extra excited because any chance that I can learn something new, and lift my nose up from the grindstone is extra exciting. And yeah, I know I'm a very psychological astrologer. So timing and planning is a big deal to connect with that. So tell, how does this technique work of annual profections?
So it's basically a birthday technique. So it's something that runs from one birthday to the next, and it basically just puts a highlight more than usual on one area of your life. It's not to say that the other areas disappear, but that there's just a little bit more of a spotlight on that area or more activity in that area that year. And so this is actually a really great technique, I thought, to introduce to listeners here, because it is a Hellenistic timing technique, and that can sound kind of intimidating to some people, but this is actually the easiest one to grasp and start using very quickly. And so I think people will really enjoy that.
Yay.
Yeah.
I already started doing a little poking around on your site and everything. I'm like, oh my God. Time lords, we'll talk about that. Anyway,
there are some more complicated timing techniques, but this one's an easier one to pick up.
Yeah, cool. So, so what are the basic things people need to know in order to use this technique?
Yeah. Well, let me share my screen, I think, so I can show visuals so people can, this isn't going to be mostly a lecture. I'm actually doing lectures of, in the coming year about timing techniques, but this will be just a quick visual for what we're talking about so people can grasp it. Let's see.
Yeah, while you're pulling that up, she is going to be at a number of astrological conferences. And are you going to be talking about this technique at most of them?
I have a full lecture on my website about this technique that I've done at a past conference. I'll be talking more about zodiacal releasing this year. It's more of a complicated Hellenistic timing technique, although a really cool one.
I saw zodiacal releasing. I was like, that's been in my head. Like, I love the word zodiacal in and of itself, but release me. How? I'm going to come check you out at NORWAC. That's in Seattle. And you're also going to be at the Great Lakes astrological conference in Ann
Mm-hmm.
Arbor, Michigan, and
Mm-hmm.
very exciting. You're on tour this year, being a
Yeah, I have a lot of talks
Sagittarius
this year.
sun, right?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, so yeah,
All
you're
right, well, I'll
Sag
let
as
you
well.
take it away here and
Okay.
teach us all. Yay.
Okay, so I mean, the basics are just, I wanted to start here. One sort of prerequisite is just if you haven't already been acquainted with whole sign houses in terms of your full birth chart, basically you do need to know your rising sign for this technique. And so if you don't know your rising sign already, just go to astro.com, and that's a reliable site that will pull up your information, and you just need an accurate birth time. So put in your time, date, place of birth, and it'll give you your whole chart, and just pay attention to what your rising sign is. So then when you have that, or if you already have that, you go here, and basically whatever sign your ascendant degree is in, that in whole sign houses is your entire first house. And so no matter if it's like, say here 1 degree Cancer or 29 degrees Cancer, that still means your whole first house is Cancer. And so after that, then you go to the next one, and that means your whole second house is Leo, and so on. You just keep going around. So there's no intercepted houses. It's just like you start with the ascendant, and whatever that sign is, you just place each of those subsequent signs on each of the houses. So that's the starting point.
So even if I'm a 9 degree Capricorn rising, it's almost as if my ascendant is set at 0 degrees, and it's 0 to 29 degrees is just the first house, Capricorn, and then it counts around. The zodiac, as most of you probably know, goes in a very specific order, always goes from Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, and it's always going to go that way. So whatever you start with, you just take the next sign after that. When you get to the end of the zodiac with Pisces, you start it over. You keep going with Aries until you wind up at 12. So
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So that's just the first thing to know to start. And then oh, it's not advancing now.
Oh, it's not. Okay.
Okay. So sorry, one sec.
We were having little technical difficulties when we were starting.
We were talking about the Jupiter Uranus trine that was happening right before we started talking. So
just making it all wonky.
Maybe a piece of it. Yeah. Okay, let me pull that up.
We always have there's always a good transit to blame. So yeah, if you guys, this is a good moment if you want to, pause, and if you don't have your chart handy or know your ascendant / rising sign, we also have the great astrolabe solar fire. We have a little widget on astrostyle.com /birth chart. So you can also pull it up there if you want, and just check out what your ascendant is. Yep. All right.
Great. Okay, so can you see that slide?
Totally.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is just how it works, the basics. It starts when you're born. We don't often think of ourselves as 0 years old as a number, but it does start when you're 0, meaning before your first birthday. So once you're born until your first birthday, you're in a first house profection year, right here, 0, first house. And then once you turn 1 year old, you go into a second house year. And that's how it works. You just keep counting around. So, it might take a moment to initially grasp if you haven't heard of this before, but it's actually a pretty easy counting around. And you can see, since there are 12 houses, then it comes back to the first house at age 12. And it keeps going around. So you can always use as a shortcut for what profection year you're in, 12 as the multiple of the first house. So 0, 12, 24, 36, 48, etc. So you can just find the nearest 12 as a shortcut for the first house, and then you can count either forward or backward to get to what age you are now.
So if you're 13, then you're a second house year.
Second house year, exactly. Exactly. And let me see, will it? No.
Or maybe more likely watching this 25, 37 or
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I'll show you that actually real quick on the last slide here. Okay, so you can see all the multiples here. Well, not all the multiples. Great. Don't feel left out if you're like 72 or above. The slide starts getting really messy if you keep doing all of the numbers. But if you need to add or subtract 12 from any of them, they're all here. So 0, 12, 24, 36, 48, etc. So just keep going out. And you can find, I wanted to put this visual up just so you can easily find your age and make sure that you're doing it correctly. So, what this does is it shows you an area of life that's going to be a focus for you at that time. And most people, unless they're born either in January or in December, like near one of the year ends, you'll go through two. So you'll have probably two profection years at different points this year in 2020.
Oh, does it start on your birthday then?
Starts on your birthday. So this is a
Ah,
birthday year thing.
right. So
And
people who are Geminis or Cancers born right in the middle of the year will actually have okay, got it.
yeah, exactly. And I know we're both born in December, so it's
So you,
easier if
like,
you're born
ride
in
the wave, yeah.
yeah. But yeah, so you'll have it starts at your birthday. So you can think of whatever age you're going to be when 2020 starts, and that's the profection year you'll be in starting the year. And then whatever age you turn during your birthday in 2020, that's the next profection year you'll be in for that part of 2020.
Well, I just turned 11, so I'm in the 12th house. Yeah.
You're in a 12th house. Exactly. So so that's a little visual. Should I leave this up or just
Yeah, I love it. I think it's
Okay.
great, and people are going to be checking that out. I'm already thinking about how this needs to be screenshotted, and like what a great way to kind of review what was happening at significant points in time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, so the gist of it is that each house, some people may know this already, some may not, but houses are the areas of life. And therefore, when you highlight a house during a certain profection year, that means those topics, those areas of life that house governs are going to be more at the forefront of your life during that year, that birthday year for you. And so it's good to know because those are topics you can expect to come up rather than being surprised by it, for instance.
Yeah, do you want to go through the houses and talk about what each year might hold, what 2020 might hold then? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm going to start with like the ring of 24.
Mm-hmm.
So 24, for instance, I'm just guessing at who might be listening, or 36, we could do that. But so 24 is a first house year. First house year is really focused on you, your identity, your appearance, even sometimes. Since it's a health and body house, the first house is the house that's most individual to who you are as a person. So it can be a time where there's more of a spotlight on you. It can be a time where you're focused more on either your body or like how you look. And that sounds sometimes a little superficial, but it's really not, because it's how you're putting yourself out there. And that comes from who you think you are at this time.
And those first impressions and the kind of the way you brand yourself or present. It might also be, I would imagine, a year where you make a big significant change too, right? Or like kind of a reinvention, do you find, of like your identity?
It can, yeah, because the first house, it's really broad in some ways because it's all about you, and that's kind of a broad topic. But yes, it can be like how you put yourself out there, who you think you are, re-envisioning yourself, all of those kind of things that are really focused on. It's actually a year where it's appropriate to be very focused on yourself. And so that's fine if you are. It's not like a bad thing. And we'll touch on this later, but it comes right after the 12th house year, which is a big shift. Yeah. So we can get back to that when we go around the circle.
Sure.
Yeah. Second house governs income, finances, how you make a living, your possessions as well. So it's like your stuff and how you get stuff. And so second house years are often very focused on how you make a living, either changing jobs or being focused on asking for a raise, or managing your money well, even if you don't. If your source of money isn't different or your amount of money isn't different, how do you manage your money that you do have? Or going, I really need a couch. I've never had a couch before. Let's get that, because that's the possessions part of the second house.
26, the year of adult furniture. Get rid of that.
Or 25. 25 is adult furniture. Yeah.
Of course, 25.
Yeah.
Yeah,
indeed.
I can't sit on this futon anymore, okay?
Exactly. Yeah, so it's a time to, and especially if it is that ring, the 20s, I mean, this can come up at any of those second house perfection years, but that one in particular can be like, how am I going to make a living as an adult? Or how have I been doing that so far? And like, am I happy with that? Or do I need to make a change?
Right. Oh, that's such a time. I can even see that at 37, a lot of people sort of achieve more mastery in their career, and are like, I need to just like if you're at a more of an entry level, you start to get really disgruntled around then and do something about it. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Fascinating.
And so then after that, you move into a third house here. And that's so age 26, 38, 50, etc. Third house years. So the third house governs actually a lot of really disparate things. So it governs siblings. It governs your neighborhood or neighbors. It governs often very communicative things, speaking, writing, lecturing, etc. It's a very educational house, and that can be either taking in education, or often with the third, you're putting it out. So you're talking about what you know, for instance. And so third house years at age 26, 38, 50, etc., can be years where you're either more focused on learning something that year. It can be a time when you're talking a lot more, you're presenting things. It can be a time where you're focused on your siblings more for some reason. They're more in your life than usual. I've actually had a couple of those where I'm just like talking to my sister way more that year.
Right.
Yeah. So those are some of the third house topics that can come up at that
I
time.
was just kind of looking at how age 38 is often when people have like their second north node return.
Mm-hmm.
And age 50 is the Chiron return, which are both kind of a time when you're questioning like, what's my purpose? But it's not necessarily, where you're going to go back to a full term, grad school, but more like, how can I put that, use the gifts that I've developed? And it might be a good time for like taking a workshop or all those third house short-term learning polishing. So
yeah, exactly.
really cool to see how it coincides with some of the other timing and transits that we
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because there's always wanted to put out there's always multiple things going on at once astrologically, of course, and so this won't be the only thing that's happening, but it is one focal thing to know about that's good for sure.
Yes. Yeah.
So then after that, you move into the fourth house, and so that's going to be age 15, 27, 39, 51, etc. And fourth house years are pretty solidly focused on home and family. Those are pretty core fourth house topics. I've seen over and over with fourth house years, people either buy their first home, for instance, or they move, or they're focused on their parents for some reason. Maybe their parents need help if they're older, or they're moving out of the house for the first time if they're younger. Things that involve where you live, where are you coming from, where is your foundation, and that sort of thing, and or family matters.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. For me, I'll have to stop saying it.
Are you remembering some?
I'm like, oh yeah, good. Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Back to everyone out there. Are you saying this? I know everyone out there is going, oh right, that happened that year. I mean, this is, how useful for knowing the themes of every year. Yeah, that's why we're doing this. So when we get around your 2020 age, you will know where to put your focus in case you've been wondering. This is amazing. Okay, so the fifth house.
So the fifth house, so that's going to be age 28, 40, 52, 64, etc. And fifth house, so big topics of the fifth house are going to be children, things you do for fun, enjoying yourself, artistic pursuits, if that's a big part of your life, can go in the fifth house. Sexuality goes in the fifth house. So oftentimes there's issues with either, depending on your age, whether it's more like 28 or more like 52, it can be on the one hand, am I gonna have children? Do I need to think about starting a family at this point? That can be an issue. And
either for 40-year-olds, yeah, for sure.
It really is, because 40, 28, it's actually really interesting seeing how these coincide with some of the other cycles, because 28, for instance, that's often the beginning of people's Saturn returns, the first Saturn return, of course. And people start thinking about that. I'm really entering adulthood for sure. Do I want to have kids? Do I want to have a family? And then 40 is like, if I want that and that hasn't happened yet, do it now. And so I do see those come up a lot in terms of thinking about children. Yeah,
a lot of my friends kind of like made 40 that cutoff date there too, or like literally like it's like okay, and had kids at age 40. So it definitely aligns in terms of the cycles of life as well.
Yeah. So those are fifth house. Children honestly is like a huge topic. And once you get older, if you're like 52 or 64, it's often, what's going on with your children at that point, because they're old enough to be doing their own things. And so it can be a focus on connecting with them more, or if they're having a hard time in their life, or different things like that. So yeah, I mean, but of course, not everyone has children. So that is a big fifth house topic, but other things can be like if you do creative artistic pursuits of some sort, you know, that can be a big year for focusing more on that. And, you know, we shouldn't overlook just that it's a house of fun and pleasure.
Right.
And, you know, so many of the other houses deal with things we have to do, but the fifth house is often about things we want to do. And so when people are in fifth house years, it's actually pretty appropriate to focus on like, I need more fun in my life. How do I do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see 52 people are just finishing up that exhaustive Chiron return where they're like, oh, my healing gifts must emerge in this, you know, dark night of the soul. And I'm ready to, I know someone who started a band at 52 or set up a
Oh, that's cool.
studio. So really seeing clients who are around 52, a lot of people came to us for readings at that very specific age. And the question, when we were doing readings, I saw like a lot of, you know, that age kind of coming up. And the question was often about like, what should I do next for myself, for me? So this is a year for rediscovering your own, what makes you happy and brings you pleasure, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that can be overlooked oftentimes when we're dealing with just what we need to do in life. And so those are times to reconnect with like what makes you happy, what brings you pleasure, you know, that it's okay to do things just for fun,
Right.
that kind of thing. And, you know,
Everyone
conversely, I guess,
in this Capricorn heavy year, please hear that.
there is that. I mean, I should say also as a sort of counter to that, because I'm just speaking to what some people might need to hear, but some other people might need to hear about the fifth house year, that it can be a focus on, you know, being responsible about how you have fun. Because I've seen that too, you know, in terms of, you know, yeah. So sometimes you need to rein in.
And kind of taking on that, you know, that mantle of responsibility that, you know, and knowing how it impacts everyone around you as a leader. Yeah.
Yeah, or yourself. So, I mean, all of these, obviously, it should go without saying, but, you know, in case people aren't aware of how this works, you know, there are more specifics depending on your own birth chart and this, you know, what rules the fifth house and so forth. So, yeah, it can go different ways depending. Yeah. So after that, right, time for tea.
Before the sixth house, let's tend to our well-being and self-care.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so you move into the sixth house. That's going to be age 29, 41, 53, etc. And so the sixth house has a lot to do with your body. It can be your physical routines, exercise, you know, nutrition, how you take care of yourself, as you were just mentioning. Sixth house can be times when you do have to look out for your health because something has come up. It's not always that way. Sometimes it's proactive, sometimes it's reactive. It's also a work house, even though it's not your kind of career in big letters. It's more about the work you have to do day to day, whether that's your job, whether that's work around the house, basically all the tasks you have to do. And so sixth house years, it's good to know that that's a focus that year because it can feel a little bit, particularly right after the fifth house.
Yeah.
Right after the fifth house, it's not going to feel as fun. You know, the sixth house is more about like doing what you need to do on a daily basis and adjusting, you know, is that working for me? How do I take care of all my daily responsibilities and tasks? And also how do I take care of my body and my health and things like that? So it's a year to focus on more of those things.
Okay. You know, and what I love about the way the zodiac cycles are is that things that you're like, oh God, a sixth house year. By the time you're done with the fifth house year, you're probably really, really ready to, you may be in that sixth house, like, I just want to sit down and produce and get these big ideas done already. I've had all these great things and I'm able to actually start on them. So it can be, I imagine it may even come as a relief to some people when that time arrives, because then they can actually produce. Yeah.
Yeah, they're all counterbalances to each other for sure. I agree. The sixth house also has to do with the people you work with. And so that can be coworkers if you sort of work a regular job. If you do have employees, the sixth house does govern employees. And so it's basically like, how do you work with the people you work with? And, you know, do those things need adjustment or are they working well? Sometimes with the sixth house, similar to the second or the 10th, it can also be like, am I happy with my job? Do I need to get a new job?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you may be on the job hunt this year, sixth housers. Okay.
Yes, yes. And so then we get to the seventh house. So age 30, 42, 54, etc. Seventh house is big year for relationships. So lots of attention and a spotlight more on like, if I have a primary relationship, how is that going? Does that need adjustment? Are we both happy, etc.? If you're not in a relationship, it's often a time where you're more focused on trying to find one, on trying to, get out there and meet people. It's interesting with the seventh house here, and you can really go into this a lot more, but, you see age 30 there, for instance.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
30,
married.
yes.
Pressure, right?
30 intersects with the Saturn return for sure. And so I see at age 30, because it has both of those overlaps, the Saturn return of like, must restructure my life, what am I doing? And age 30 of a seventh house profection year, it is a big year for marriages and divorces, I've noticed. Yeah.
Or at 18 when you realize that you have to break up with your high school
Yes.
love because really, they, got a baseball scholarship and you went to art school. That happened.
Right, exactly. That can happen. Or, for people who weren't as big into dating, it can be their first like serious relationship at age 18, things like that. So yeah. And then of course you can
serious relationships coming in, right?
Yes, because you're finally an adult and you're off on your own sometimes at that point. And of course you can see this continuing to go out like 42, right, as the Uranus opposition. So clearly, seventh house year overlapping with that can be like a lot of relationship stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of relationships with the Uranus opposition. If you haven't sowed your wild oats, that can be at 42. I do see that happen at 42. People who kind of, maybe married really young, or they start to kind of get the wandering eye or get a little restless and often have to go through a process of a very Uranian kind of teenage process, but kind of coming back to like really by the end of it establishing what they want from a relationship by kind of liberating themselves from restriction, so that the seventh house can show up all kinds of ways in the way you deal with relationships in those years, I imagine.
Definitely. And it's just good to know when you get to those points, that you're going to be focused on that. Or if you're not and you're partnered, your partner might be bringing up relationship things. So it's just a year to focus on that piece of your life a lot more.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So then after that, age 19, 31, 43, 55, etc., is an eighth house here. They're kind of alternating right now. I can see with the fifth and sixth, and then the seventh and eighth, some, sound immediately more fun than others. The eighth house is usually not as fun. It has to do with shared resources. So things, if you are partnered, for instance, like shared money with your spouse or something like that. It can be things like taxes, loans, debts, things like that, things that involve banks, mortgages for sure, because the eighth house is other people's money. And so it's not just maybe your partner's money, but it can also be in the big picture sense, other people's money, meaning like things involving banks or accountants or things like that. So it's a good year. It sounds funny to me and kind of specific, kind of like really specific, but it's like, this is a year to not screw up your taxes, for instance, because there's going to be more focus on it. Or, this is a year where I've seen this actually a lot, where if you have a lot of debt, you need to like get on top of that. This is a year to do that.
A year where you see like, people doing some work on their sexuality as well, or their shadow or anything, eighth house like that, I wonder.
Some, not so much the sexuality, but I have seen the eighth house, the deeper psychological undercurrents can for sure be an eighth house thing. That's not really a traditional meaning of the eighth house, but I definitely see it from the modern perspective as well, that does come in. And so, yeah, if you are like interested in going, to counseling, for instance, it's a good year for that, because it's a good year of exploring the depths of, deeper feelings that bubble up for you. And that might in fact happen for you more this year. And so it might be a good time to look at that.
Perhaps the power balances within these joint relationships, which can show up as sex, money, all of those types of things,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, got it.
Yeah, that can come up. And then mortality issues come up. So like doing your will, kind of being realistic about like, that we're not here forever, dealing with your parents' stuff sometimes if you're older and you need to deal with like their estate, so those are a bunch of eighth house things.
Got All right. So the
So,
ninth house.
so
Going
we,
up to
we
the
get more
top.
expansive again once we leave the eighth house. We go to the ninth house. So it's going to be age 20, 32, 44, 56, etc. And ninth house years are times to kind of expand your horizons for sure. So at age 20, for instance, a lot of people are in college, and that can be a time where you are more focused on what you're learning. It's not that you're only going to be focused that 1 year, of course, but those are years in particular where you want to expand what you know more than usual. You want to learn, maybe new philosophies, new worldviews, how do other people understand life, that kind of thing. That all goes in the ninth house. And also the ninth house is a big travel house. So I've for sure seen that people do more long distance travel during that year. Yeah, it's often either study or travel, I would say.
Oh my God, I wish I was going to be 8 this year.
Right?
I think we actually did take a big that was my first plane ride, and we went to
Oh, that's cool.
Florida to Disneyland and that year.
Yeah, actually, now that you're mentioning that, that might have been mine too.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Mom and Dad, you had no idea that you were
Right.
in the perfect sync with Profections, but thanks.
Yeah,
Land.
exactly. And so it's expanding beyond what you've experienced or what you know already, whether that's mentally, or, through study, whether that's physically through actual travel, and can also be cross-cultural things. You don't have to actually either be in university or travel anywhere to meet people who come from other places or who see the world differently than you do. And so it's a great year to focus on that and learn more of what you don't know.
Diversify your social portfolio, people.
Mm-hmm.
And also, is that also maybe a year where people go back to school or do a little more long-term training as well?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, people often go back to school during some of these years.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I could see that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
How about the 10th house?
So the 10th house is going to be career focus. So that's going to be age 21, 33, 45, 57, etc. And so that's a big career year. And how that goes for you, again, it depends on the specifics of your chart, but it's typically a year where there's a lot of focus on what you're trying to do in the world. That can be your actual work. It can also be things that you're not paid for, but like you're known for in the community, your public roles in life. So how people see you who don't really know who you are. They just kind of know who you are, but they don't actually know you. That's the 10th house. And for sure, your long-term career things come, full focus that year. Sometimes pinnacles, depending on the specifics.
Yeah, 21 is often like people are wrapping up college at that age,
Mm-hmm.
or that's when your parents officially give you no more excuses if you don't go to university to like stay at home.
Right.
Like that adulthood moment coincides
Mm-hmm.
with how you define yourself through the adult responsibility of careers. So that's really
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it can go for so many different, situations, even if people aren't in college. Like I was getting my hair, I talk astrology with my hairstylist and always. And
so do I, yeah.
and so a while back she was saying, oh, my coworker here, he's about to graduate from hair school. And then he's gonna be, like full-fledged hairstylist. He was about to turn 33. So he had been in this 32 ninth house year of study, which wasn't a full university, but was still a course of study.
Yeah.
And then he was about to be like, okay, now I can fully launch my career at age 33. And I was like, oh yeah, totally. He's about to go into 10th house year.
And now he's just thriving, clearly,
Yeah.
because he was timing it right. And it's 33 is kind of that year where you do feel a little more like a grown, like you're like, I don't want to, like, people, it's like, thanks for telling me I look like I'm 25, but I really want to be seen as a little more like of a grown up and like be, perhaps hired in that way. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's a bit past your Saturn return, if you are in that 33 range. And so, you're kind of like, okay, I've got this figured out, and now what am I really moving towards? What am I trying to build in my career?
Building
Mm-hmm.
years, great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so the 11th house, tell
So
us.
after that, age 22, 34, 46, etc., those are all 11th house years. And the 11th house has a lot to do with, whereas you're moving out of the 10th house year, which is kind of focusing on you and your own career, you move into the 11th house right after that, and you're focused on how do I fit into the larger world? How do I fit into the larger social sphere? And so the 11th house is a lot about your colleagues, your friends, the groups you belong to that can be more formal or informal. So it can be like a group of friends you go out to brunch with every month, or it can be like a professional organization, depending on specifics, again, of your chart. But it's about, how do you fit into the bigger social picture?
Mm. And some squad goals as well, perhaps,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's very 11th house. So yeah, it's a time to think, whereas you were thinking more about yourself again in the 10th house typically, then you move into the 11th house and it's like, how do I think about, me and other people and how we do things together. And so, yeah, I'm trying to think of good examples of that. But yeah, typically people are more focused on like their friendships at that time. Either again, proactively or reactively, or they're taking a position on a board or something like that. That can be more of a
Something
formal
getting maybe
11th
involved
house.
in some activism and
Yes.
things like
Mm-hmm.
that as well. I
Yep.
was thinking about how during an 11th house year, we did some restructuring of our team at Astro
Mm.
Style, and even like, working with people virtually. And,
Mm-hmm.
it can also be if you apply it to more, modern day interpretation, it doesn't even have to be people who are in the same city as you. You can be
No.
connecting over the internet and everything as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I actually see social media a lot in the 11th house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're like connecting with lots of different networks of people out there who are not like right there with you.
22-year-olds, 34-year-olds. Hey, who
Mm-hmm.
wants to be an Instagram influencer?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So then after that, which I think is sort of the oddest shift in these annual profections, but I've definitely watched them, work this way. After the very busy out there social year of the 11th house, you move into the 12th house, which is much more about seclusion. And so the 12th house is kind of like you kind of it's like the hermit card in tarot or something like that. You're kind of holding up on your own, like, actually, let me pull back and revisit like my entire life. It's a reflection year.
A life review kind of year, huh?
It can be, yeah. I mean, it's typically, and this is actually one of the reasons I really like knowing profections, and I like other people knowing profections, because I know I would have really liked to known that I was in a 12th house year before I knew what they were. Because otherwise, you can feel, it's kind of like a big Saturn transit. It can feel a little similar to that. You can feel like, why
Talk
do
to
I
me
feel so...
about this. I'm in one of those right
Okay.
now. So
Yeah.
go
And of course,
on.
of course, right. I mean, I
Yeah.
do want to say it's not going to be of course, the only thing happening. But typically during 12th house years, people do feel a little bit more pulled back, even if they do still have to maintain things that are more outward in the world. And so it's a good time to take more time than usual for yourself, for reflection, for alone time. And sometimes the other things can come up during 12th house years that like make you take alone time. But even if they don't, it's, it's a year to pull back your energies, even if you can't do that 100%.
Is it a year often where you're sorting out, letting go of some old things, figuring out what, you want to bring into the next round of them all?
It can be, yeah.
Yeah.
It is a very reflective year, and the 12th house can be about endings sometimes. And so it can have an element of that. It's not always about, just endings for people, but it can be a reevaluation time of what they do want to bring forward or what they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know in modern astrology too, the 12th house often represents your mentors, your spirit guides, your earth angel, like is that a year when people take on more of a mentoring role sometimes or bring in helpful people? Have you seen that happen?
I typically see that more in the 11th house,
Ah,
in terms of like, dealing with other people in the social sphere. Typically the 12th house I see as a very solitary year, even if you're also doing other things because transits are happening in other areas of your life. But yeah, it's more of a you time
okay,
kind of
cool.
transit.
I've
And
been saying like, oh, I need more spaciousness. I need more time. Like my 11th house year last year was filled with so many different things and people
yeah,
and this and that. It's like,
yeah.
just goes to show with all these things, the cycle that comes after can be a relief, whether it's yin or yang or here or there, right?
They do go back and forth a bit, yeah. And so it is like you put all your energy out there in the 11th house in a very outward social way, and then you pull it back in the 12th house. And as we were mentioning earlier, that comes right before the first house. And so, you know, you pull back during this 12th house year. And I think that's, again, I really like people to know the 12th house in particular, even though all of them are important to know, because oftentimes otherwise people feel like there's something wrong with them. And it's like, no, it is actually a time where you probably will be feeling more like pulling back, and that's completely appropriate.
It doesn't mean
So
you're dropping out of society, or, you know,
right,
you just
right.
you need that more reflective, solitary time for that.
Mm-hmm.
Powerful.
And it is, you know, as you mentioned a little bit there, I mean, the part that I do see sometimes, depending on the specifics of different people's 12th houses, is if you do contemplative practices, you know, meditation, qigong, yoga, like things like that, or any more esoteric, it's about the experiential. It's not like religion per se. It's more like, you know, things you do, again, it's solitary, things you do on your own, but that make you feel connected to larger things, even if you're not connected to people right then.
Right.
So that can be a good thing to do.
All of it, and that, yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
grid and the, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And some people access that more easily than others, but you know, if you're into that kind of thing, that can be a good time for that. And that can keep you feeling more connected, even if you're not being as social.
Yeah, I wonder if people do tend to join more shamanic circle. Instead of joining a networking group, join a circle, you know,
Could
if you have
be.
to be around people or something, you know, or
Yeah.
something where you don't even have to be. I'm thinking like sound baths and group meditations where you don't have to necessarily extend yourself socially, perhaps.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's that kind of thing. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay,
Yeah.
so is there another element to this that you wanted to share about it all? Or do you feel like, I mean, you've given us a lot to work with here, which is amazing.
Sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this is the basic idea. I mean, it depends on like, you know, your level of learning in astrology so far. So this is kind of all you need to know if you're first getting into astrology, and maybe you know like your sun sign or your moon sign or things like that, but haven't worked with it a lot. This is already great things to know to bring forward. So say your age 26. And so you know that you're going to be 26 starting in the year 2020, and then you're going to turn 27 at some point. So this is already good to know, because age 26, you'll be like, okay, I'm going to maybe deal with my siblings more. Maybe this is a good time to go do that one course I was thinking of. That'll be, you know, just like a 6-month thing. It's a great time to do that. And then you'll know that you're going to move into a fourth house year later in the year, and start thinking about, do I need to move later this year? Or what do I need to do about my home life? You know, it's good planning, even if this is all you know. So I do want to put that out first for people who might just know a little bit astrologically.
This is great planning. This is the screenshot planning tool, and you just have to read up on the houses a bit more to deepen your understanding of what may be happening. So yeah.
So, I mean, there is, of course, more you can do if you do know more specifics. So I would say for intermediate level, if you watch your transits, for instance, if you already know your birth chart and you already watch, like, say, you know, Venus going through your houses or things like that, then the next good thing to do with this is using these whole sign houses. And do be sure to do that, or else you won't get the right ruler here that I'm about to talk about. Then you need to see what is the traditional ruler of the sign that it's come to. So say we have like, well, let's see, do we want to use yours? So say we want to use, unless you don't use yours publicly.
Oh, I don't mind. Yeah, I'm happy to share my chart, actually. I know a lot of astrologers aren't, but I don't know. Capricorn rising.
Your Capricorn rising. Okay. So say Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, Aries. So say you were in a fourth house year. You're not, but say that you were. So we would.
I was. No, I'm kidding.
So we would say Capricorn is first house and whole sign. Aquarius is second house. Pisces is third house, and then Aries is fourth house. And what traditionally rules Aries is Mars. And so that year, transits to or from the ruler of the profected house are going to become more important than usually. And so you can watch all your transits and they'll all still matter, but these should stick out a little more and also should be more important for you that year. And so if you want to really focus, because sometimes I know when people are first getting into astrology, it sounds like a lot is going on and it's a lot to watch. And so this is a really good way to narrow down what's particularly important to watch in your transits.
So since I'm having a 12th house year, it's, and Sagittarius is up there at my 12th house. So I'm watching Jupiter.
Jupiter. Yes. And so that would
Well, at
be.
least I've got Jupiter in the game for the 12th house. That might
That is actually really nice,
bit, right?
that helps a lot. Yeah.
I'm like, I'm having fun. Like the Starstruck videos. Like I'm feeling social, but also needing more alone time. So that could be that, that does it interplay like that for those who are listening for more intermediate levels? Like
yes, for sure. And that alters things significantly. And this is where, again, the full birth chart comes in. So for you, you'd be watching transits to or from Jupiter. So in terms of just watch transiting Jupiter for your whole birthday year and see what happens when it, for instance, conjoins other natal planets in your chart, because that'll be a more important transit for you. And then similarly,
I'm having my Jupiter return, and it's crossing my North Node, so this should be a really cool year. Yeah,
that's a really lovely lineup that you have there, because so that would be both. That would be transits from Jupiter, and it would also be a transit to your natal Jupiter. So that's the second thing you watch, is transits to your natal Jupiter. So yeah, you actually have a really nice setup for your 12th house year.
Thank you, universe, because I could use one of those years. Well, who can't, right? This is for those of you who are just getting into astrology, by the way, this is how the obsession begins, right? I mean, didn't it for you, Lisa? Like all of a sudden you start to like connect the dots, and then there's this layer and that, and my God,
Yeah, there's always more to learn, for sure. It's pretty fascinating that way.
Do you do reading? Do you do one-on-one readings at all for people, or sessions if they want to find, map out a more complex profection chart with you?
Yeah, for sure. I do consultations. It's just at my website, leisaschaim.com. And I use Profections. I use other timing tools like zodiacal releasing. And then I use like eclipses, transits, things like that.
I'm going to be getting a reading from you. That'll be my birthday present for myself, because I want to know about the zodiacal release and everything. It's
I'd be happy to.
Exciting to learn a new view of astrology. And Hellenistic astrology, it doesn't take into account anything past Saturn, right? Uranus, Neptune, involved in this?
Yeah, I mean, because they weren't known then. So yeah, it is a whole system that doesn't require those 3 outer planets. And you can see the timing tools just use all of the 7 traditional planets.
Okay.
I personally do blend some of the Hellenistic and some of the modern stuff. So I do put in the outer planets, but I just don't use them as house sign rulers. Yeah.
I see. Okay.
But I don't leave them out because they're important too.
So whatever sign is on the house cusp, or is not even the house cusp, we're doing whole sign. So whatever zodiac sign is in that house, you look at the ruling planet of it, and that's what you want to watch this year. So yeah.
And just to put that out there, so that's the next step, past just what the house themes are. And just to put it out there, I know some people do know Profections. They're becoming more popular lately to use, at least in the astrological community. But I think publicly, it's nice to put this out there because I don't think it's filtered down too much yet. But just to let people know, it can get more advanced than that. So there are other things you can do with this. Just if you're interested in learning further, you can perfect from different houses, the same number of houses. You also want to look, if you do know how to look at this already, whatever's ruling the perfected house, wherever it's placed, it kind of activates that whole configuration that year. So like the fact that Jupiter is in your 12th house, for instance, and then it's going to be ruling another house. So it kind of activates that whole complex of things. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. And for you, that would be what, 9th house?
Yeah. Oh, for my solar natal chart?
Oh, no, that wouldn't be right. Sorry. That would be Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces. Yeah, 3rd house.
On the cusp of my 12th and okay. Maybe I'm going a little, not using the natal. And I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but I kind of alluded to it just now. You do want to use the traditional rulerships for Scorpio, Aquarius, and Pisces. Yeah, why don't we just do a quick list?
Yeah.
of what every zodiac. So if you have Aries, whatever house, if you have Aries on the cusp of your perfected house, is that the way you say it? Then it's Mars, right?
Yeah. So you're going to watch Mars transits and look at where Mars is placed for you that year. Yeah. So with Taurus, you're going to be looking at Venus as your ruler for the year, for where it's placed and where it's transiting. For Gemini, Mercury is going to be big that year. So the Mercury retrogrades, for instance, will probably be more important for you that year than usual. For Cancer, it's the moon. So then you can watch transits to the moon. You don't really want to watch transits from the moon because that's like pretty constant. It's going to be
days of low.
Yeah, exactly. It's
might
pretty
be a
constant.
moody year, but still.
So with the moon, you actually want to watch transits to your natal moon and then eclipses. It's basically activates the lunations more, and you can watch all of the lunations if you want, like the full moons and the new moons, but typically it just means transits to your natal moon and eclipses will be more important that year.
Yeah.
And then same with Leo, actually. The next one, Leo, is ruled by the sun. So you want to look at transits to your natal sun, and then eclipses again, because the sun is an integral part of the lunations. And then let's see, Leo, Virgo is another Mercury year. So you want to watch transits to from Mercury. That can be more busy, more mental kind of year. And then Libra is another Venus year. So you're going to be watching transits to or from natal Venus. And then Scorpio, this is where we get to, the distinction where you want to watch the traditional ruler. So Scorpio is traditionally ruled by Mars. And so transits to your natal Mars or transits from Mars are more important. Then Sagittarius is Jupiter.
Don't really pay attention to Pluto at all. Oh boy, there's a siren in
I heard that.
Time for Scorpio. They're like, give me my Pluto back. I want Pluto.
Yeah, so with this timing technique, it is a Hellenistic timing technique. It was developed with a specific rulership scheme. So you don't really want, it'll work if you use Mars. I'm not sure it'll work if you use Pluto, just because they were developed in conjunctions. So, yeah. So watch the transits to or from Mars that year. Sagittarius, of course, is Jupiter. So you want to watch transits to or from Jupiter like you have this year. And then Capricorn is Saturn. So that's going to be transits to or from your Saturn. Aquarius, again, is Saturn. Traditionally, is Saturn rules both of those signs. So you're going to be watching Saturn kind of 2 years in a row, which people can often notice. It feels like more of a serious time.
Yeah.
And then finally, Pisces. Pisces is traditionally ruled by Jupiter in addition to Sagittarius. And so that's another year where you watch the Jupiter transits.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, my natal Jupiter is at 11 degrees, 11 minutes in the first house. And I always see 11, 11. I even have it tattooed on my arm. So I'm also going to be watching what's, aspecting that, what's hitting that, okay.
Yeah, your Jupiter return should be sort of doubly important this year because of that.
Wow, it's in January, third week, I think, of January. Well, there's probably a couple of them I have to check, but yeah, it's, I'm excited for 2020, a little nervous, but also excited, aren't we all? Yeah, well, this is amazing, Leisa. Thank you so much. Are there any last things you want to make sure that people know? I mean, how can they learn more? On your website, I saw that you actually have a class about this, very affordably priced.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a full lecture on it with like example charts and things like that. It'll go into some of the things we've discussed, but then seeing it in action and with more
it's really helpful when you can see it, like when you can see a chart being pointed to. I mean, in our STARSTRUCK, we're giving everyone a taste of it and just talking broader topics, but I think your site is, and you'll be able to see all the URLs below where the video is to find you. But you're a great teacher. And I think seeing if this is intriguing to you guys, definitely hop on her site and watch the full one and get it. It'll click much more then. But this is super clear to me. And I just, this wheel is gold right here that we have up, So, well, I'm going to just ask you one last thing, which is to tell us more about where, I know you have some podcasts. Where can we find you to learn more besides your website?
Yeah. So of course my website, leisaschaim.com. I do the the electional podcast for the astrology podcast. If you listen to the forecasts, you'll hear the featured election for the month, and I'm the one that picks that out. And then Chris Brennan and I do the auspicious elections forecast on that site as well, where if you are a subscriber at the $5 tier or higher, you get access to a full podcast where we talk about the best dates and times that whole month to start important things or to take action on things that you want to go well. So I do those. We're actually going to put out, since it's at the end of the year here, we are hopefully going to be putting out by the end of the year. So by the time people are watching this, a year ahead of report for elections. So you can know well ahead of time if you want to plan important things that are further down the road during your 2020 year, but not just in January. Then we put out the best date and time each month to do important things for the whole year.
Which is what electional astrology. We're not talking about Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Kamala Harris, although we are, and I wish everyone in the election would have a little electional astrology report for their campaigns, that would be smart. But, electional astrology is it mostly the starting point of things, right? The inception, or is it,
exactly. It's just like every person has a birth chart because that's when you began to be a separate person. And so buildings have, charts and, when they first broke ground or, businesses have incorporation charts. And so anything that starts something as an entity has a birth chart. And so that's what electional astrology is kind of starting things off on the best foot for things to go better.
And if people are looking for a very specific date for things like weddings or starting a business, I see that you also help people so they can do a consultation with you on that too, right?
I do currently, although the wait list is getting kind of long because people come to know that I do that. So I am still doing a little bit of that, but it may take a while. So it's better for dates that are kind of further out.
Listen to the podcast, guys. I hope that means you're having a 5th house year and that you're going to raise your rates or something like that. Or
we'll see.
A second house.
Second house year,
right? That would be more likely. Oh my God.
Yeah. So those are some of the things I do. And then, of course, if you want to see any lectures locally, I'll be doing quite a lot of lecturing this year.
Yes, and that's all on your site.
Yeah.
All right. Any last little tidbits for everyone here? Or?
These are just, I'm trying to think if there's some additional tidbit.
That's okay.
These are just really interesting. I guess actually there is one additional tidbit, which is these can be either more obvious in some years, like actual events, or there can be more just like day-to-day things that you might not think back to 10 years later, but still were kind of important at the time. So like I mentioned in my 3rd house years, a couple of them, I was just talking with my sister way more than usual that year. Mm-hmm. And, one of the times was because she told me maybe 2 weeks after my birthday, she's like, I'm going to get married this year. And so we had a reason to be talking all year. Nice. So sometimes it's things like that. And sometimes it's just more subtle. Like I got really into genealogy during the 4th house year, for instance. So it's not so much, I don't want people to worry, in other words, because sometimes it's just like what you're personally focused on at the time. And there can be events associated with it, but that's more apt if transits are kind of triggering it. And if there are no major transits triggering it that year, it could be a little bit more in the background than otherwise.
But if there's actually something, connecting to where the planet placement is, you may see, and that could be for good too. So it could be
definitely.
Like I'm looking forward to my Jupiter return now and see what, what can I let go of to create more time for myself?
Right.
Every astrologer's dilemma out there, right?
Well, and the other tidbit about that is look back 12 years. Any profection year that you're in right now, if you're listening to this, look back 12 years, or if you're old enough, 24 years, and see if you remember similar things coming up or things coming up around that topic or one of those topics that year, because you should be able to see some similarities since it's a 12-year repetition, even though some of the specifics will be different because the transits will be different.
Oh yeah, that's great. I mean, that's how we kind of do predictive astrology anyways, as we were looking at the transits in our 2020 book that we wrote, and that everybody who's watching this will be getting a PDF of too. So as a little bonus, there is, you'll see, I mean, as Jupiter and Pluto conjunct, and you know, there's just such a pattern. So this applies to your life too, everybody, and take it as a fascinating study. Now no one knows exactly what's going to happen, and each of these has each of these houses is filled with opportunity as well. So sometimes even when you let go of things, it's for the best, because that makes a space for something new to come in. And
Definitely.
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Leisa. It was great to
You're
talk
welcome.
to you.
Yeah, great to talk to you
And
too.
happy 2020.
Thank you. You as well. I'm excited.
Bye.
Bye-bye.